Hello everyone, and welcome to History of the Ancient World. Today we're journeying back in time to explore one of the most influential civilizations in human history, the Roman Republic. Forget what you think you know from movies. We're going to dig into the real story of how a small city-state on the Italian peninsula grew to dominate the entire Mediterranean world. It's a tale of ambition, innovation, conflict, and ultimately transformation. So, how did it all begin? Legend tells us of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers suckled by a she-wolf, who founded the city of Rome in 753 BC. While that makes for a great story, the reality is a bit more complex. Early Rome was likely a small settlement on the Tiber River, ruled by a series of kings. But the Romans grew tired of monarchical rule. In 549 BC, they overthrew their last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, and established a new form of government, a republic. The word republic comes from the Latin res publica, which literally means the public thing, or the public affair. This was a radical idea for its time, a government that, in theory, belonged to the people. The heart of the Roman Republic was its unique political structure, designed to prevent any single individual from gaining too much power. It was a delicate balance. At the top were two consuls, elected annually, who held executive power. Think of them as co-presidents. They commanded the army, presided over the Senate, and executed its decrees. Having two consuls who could veto each other was a brilliant check on power. Then you have the Senate, perhaps the most famous institution of the Republic. It was an advisory council composed of about 300 of the most powerful and experienced men in Rome, mostly from the patrician or aristocratic class. While they couldn't technically pass laws themselves, their influence was immense. Their decrees, the Senatus Consulta, carried enormous weight, and they controlled the state's finances. You didn't want to get on the wrong side of the Senate. But what about the common people, the plebeians? Initially, they had very little power. All the political turmoil you hear about in the early Republic. Much of it stemmed from the conflict of the orders, a long struggle by the plebeians for political equality. They used their leverage, namely their essential role as soldiers, to demand more rights. One of their biggest victories was the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs. These officials had the extraordinary power to veto the actions of any magistrate, even the consuls, to protect the interests of the common people. This struggle also led to the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written law code, ensuring that laws were applied equally to all citizens, not just interpreted by patrician judges. So you have this complex system of consuls, senators, and tribunes, all interacting and sometimes clashing. It wasn't a democracy in the modern sense, but it was a system that allowed for a degree of popular participation and was remarkably stable for centuries. This political stability was a key ingredient in Rome's recipe for success. It provided the foundation upon which they could build a powerful military and expand their territory. And expand they did. The early Republic was almost constantly at war with its neighbors in Italy. The Romans weren't just brutal conquerors, though. They were also master strategists and diplomats. When they conquered a people, they often offered them a form of citizenship or allied status. This was revolutionary. Instead of just ruling over resentful subjects, they incorporated them into the Roman system, turning former enemies into loyal allies who supplied soldiers for the ever-growing Roman legions. By 264 BC, Rome had consolidated its control over the entire Italian peninsula. But their ambitions didn't stop there. Looking across the sea, they saw a formidable rival, Carthage. Carthage, located in modern-day Tunisia, was a massive naval and trading power that controlled much of North Africa, Spain, and the islands of the western Mediterranean. The clash between these two superpowers was inevitable, leading to a series of 3 epic conflicts known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War was primarily a naval struggle for control of Sicily. The Romans, not traditionally a seafaring people, reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian ship and built a massive fleet in a remarkably short time. They added an innovation called the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed their superior soldiers to fight on enemy ships as if on land. After more than 20 years of brutal fighting, Rome emerged victorious, gaining Sicily as its first overseas province. But the most famous part of the Punic Wars is the second one, thanks to one of history's greatest military geniuses, Hannibal Barca. Sworn to a lifelong hatred of Rome, Hannibal led his army, complete with war elephants, on an audacious trek from Spain, over the Pyrenees and the Alps, and into Italy. He inflicted a series of devastating defeats on the Romans, most famously at the Battle of Cannae, where he encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman army. Rome was on its knees, its very survival in question. But Rome's strength was its resilience. Even after Cannae, the Roman allies largely remained loyal, and the Republic refused to surrender. They adopted a new strategy, avoiding direct battle with Hannibal in Italy while attacking Carthaginian territories elsewhere. A brilliant Roman general, Scipio Africanus, took the fight to Spain and then to Africa itself, forcing Hannibal to return home to defend Carthage. The two legendary generals finally met at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, where Scipio defeated Hannibal, ending the war. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. There was a third Punic War a half-century later, but it was more of a final, brutal mop-up operation, ending with the complete destruction of the city of Carthage. The conquest of the Mediterranean brought immense wealth, power, and new ideas flowing into Rome. But this success came at a price and planted the seeds of the Republic's downfall. The vast influx of slave labor from conquered territories drove small farmers off their land and into the cities, creating a large, unemployed urban mob. The gap between the super-rich, who profited from the new provinces, and the desperately poor grew wider and wider. The traditional Roman values of duty, discipline, and simplicity began to erode. This social and economic crisis led to a century of political violence and civil war. Figures like the Gracchi brothers attempted to pass land reforms to help the poor, but they were assassinated by the senatorial elite, who saw them as a threat to their wealth and power. This broke a long-standing taboo against political violence in Rome. Then came the rise of powerful generals, who commanded the loyalty of their soldiers more than the state. Marius reformed the army, allowing landless citizens to enlist and promising them land upon retirement. This created professional armies that were loyal to their general, not the Republic. This set the stage for a series of civil wars, first between Marius and another general, Sulla, who marched his army on Rome itself, an unthinkable act just a generation earlier. The final decades of the Republic were dominated by a series of larger-than-life figures. You had Pompey the Great, a brilliant general who conquered vast territories in the east. You had Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and of course you had Julius Caesar. These three men formed an informal alliance known as the First Triumvirate to dominate Roman politics. Caesar, through his conquest of Gaul, became incredibly wealthy and popular, and he had a battle-hardened, fanatically loyal army. The Senate, led by his rival Pompey, grew fearful of his power and ordered him to disband his army. Caesar's response was to lead his legion across the Rubicon River, the northern boundary of Italy. This was an act of treason, an open declaration of war on the Republic. The phrase, crossing the Rubicon, still means making an irreversible decision. Another devastating civil war ensued, from which Caesar emerged as the sole ruler of Rome. He was made dictator for life and began to implement sweeping reforms. While many of his reforms were popular and necessary, his accumulation of power and king-like status horrified many traditionalist senators. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, a group of senators crying "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, assassinated Caesar in the Senate House, hoping to restore the Republic. But their hopes were in vain. Caesar's murder plunged Rome into yet another round of civil wars. On one side were Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius. On the other was the Second Triumvirate, formed by Caesar's loyal general Mark Antony, his ambitious great-nephew Octavian, and a general named Lepidus. After defeating the assassins, Antony and Octavian turned on each other. The final showdown came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian's forces defeated the combined fleets of Antony and his lover, the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. With all his rivals gone, the 32-year-old Octavian was the undisputed master of the Roman world. But he was clever. He knew that Romans still hated the idea of a king. So he claimed to be restoring the Republic. He kept the Senate and the other Republican offices, but he concentrated all the real power in his own hands. He was given the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and Princeps, or first citizen. In reality, he was Rome's first emperor, and the Roman Republic was dead. The Roman Empire had begun. So the story of the Roman Republic is a 500-year epic of incredible growth, adaptation, and conflict. It's the story of how a system built for a small city-state couldn't cope with the pressures of governing a vast, multicultural empire. Its legacy, however, is undeniable. Its ideas about law, government, checks and balances, and civic duty have profoundly shaped Western civilization, and its dramatic rise and fall continues to fascinate and teach us to this day. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the Roman Republic. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to History of the Ancient World for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments what ancient civilization you'd like to see us cover next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.